Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 808. I'm Tom Kegley, your host. Today, we feature our discussion with Steven Schkolne. We talk about design thinking and about how design thinking impacts users and user satisfaction. We answer what happens when a design thinker builds a business. Steven Schkolne is a computer scientist, designer, entrepreneur, and type geek who's particularly passionate about the way humans work creatively with machines. His current focus is a web project called MightyMeld, a visualization and creation platform for sophisticated React codebases. Links in the show notes to Steven's LinkedIn and MightyMeld and other websites. Hey, by the way, Steven called out Dynamo, a type design agency, during the podcast. There's a link in the show notes to that. I actually went out there and geeked out a little bit on that type too. So check them out at abcdynamo.com. Link in the show notes again. Before we get started, learn to tame your work intake beast. Are you ready to find time to use design thinking? Stop letting your out-of-control backlog reduce the value your products deliver. Our next Mastering Work Intake cohort starts on the 31st of May and runs through the 28th of June. 5 manageable 90-minute gatherings, a quick testimonial, a great memorable session, and a lot of inspiration to adopt this mindset and drive this across the organization. A big thank you, all caps, for hosting these sessions and writing this great book on work intake. Both are just awesome. Thank you, Shomo Sidikar, Enterprise Agile Coach. For more details, hop over to our Maven site, link in the show notes, or just head over to www.maven.com and look for work intake. SPaMCAST listeners get a $50 discount on the cohort workshop. Use the code SPAM50. Are you ready to talk design thinking, AI, and building a business? It's time for the discussion. Steven Schkolne, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
I am looking forward to this conversation. It's really good to meet people that you at least have started to have a conversation with even beforehand.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, Tom. And I love how your show talks about so much of the process stuff we do in the world of software. And of course, as someone who's worked for decades in the industry, I love all that stuff. But I'm also excited to get into the creative process and some things around visual design, which are really close to my heart in our conversation today.
Before we dive into the fun stuff, this whole idea of creative and technological, or technology and creative, how do those two things go together?
I think of technology as really creative. I guess some people have this sort of division where there's like creative art and there's engineering, and these things are different. I see engineering as being really creative. I see MBAs as being very creative, or accountants as being creative. I see creativity in so many different endeavors in life. I find it a little artificial that sometimes people are like, oh, if you're making pictures, that's creative, and these other things aren't. So I tend to see creativity very, very broadly.
I, as a rule, would rather my accountant not be creative. Just saying. They might have a wonderful creative bend, but I don't want to get audited. Just that's high up on my hit parade. Design thinking. And design thinking is one of those creative aspects. I think that's an important part of creating at least technology that interfaces with users. How is that related to actual user satisfaction and other forms of impacts?
Yeah, I see design thinking as a process that's a little different from typical thinking. When you think of typical thinking, you're kind of, going into your desk, or you're just doing a bunch of thinking inside your own head. And I think design thinking, the way I see it is different because it's experiential. in order to practice design thinking, you interview customers, you try your product, you use your product, you use other products, you look at other brands, you look at how other things are done, and you experience it over time, and you let that experiential aspect resonate and work with the cognitive aspects to come up with solutions. And that's why, the same thing actually does happen with engineering. And I think there's a kind of design thinking to engineering design as well as visual design. And it ends up resulting in better experiences for consumers and the people who use the products, because the person making the creative choices has experienced what they've experienced, has been in the shoes of the end user. And so you have that experience of your target audience while you're designing the solution. And it makes for a very holistic solution. Whereas if you go away and you think to yourself, and I've done this myself as a designer, I know what the solution is. I've seen this problem 10 times before. It's a sign-up form, right? And you make the sign-up form and ship it. It's not going to work nearly as well as if you test it and experience it, maybe ship it to a small percentage of your audience, see how it works. And you have this holistic understanding of how it works in context in a world that's ever changing.
I think that's easier for us in sort of the software related business, because we can probably segment our audiences and explore different approaches, A/B testing, whatever we want to do there. But even there, I'm sure we could probably open up the internet and look around and find at least a half a dozen things. I can show you traffic patterns where engineers obviously didn't have anything to do with human beings when they designed it. Same thing with websites. Why are what you're describing makes sense.
Right.
Why do we have so much trash out there that does nothing? Obviously, nobody did that.
Yeah. It takes a lot more time to practice design thinking. And you don't necessarily feel like you're working as much. So let's say you're putting together a landing page for a new product. You can sit down in 2 days, get the landing page done, practice zero design thinking, and just go on your laptop at your coffee shop, get it done, ship it, and you got it done in 2 days. Or you could do the same thing with a more design thinking approach, where you make one version of it, you show it to 10 people, you talk to them, right? You stop people on the street, you show it to them.
Talk to them?
Exactly. The design thinking process takes a lot more time, and it doesn't feel like work. So a lot of organizations, if there's pressure and deadlines and there's a roadmap pressure, even in great software organizations, there are these pressures that lead you to be like, I want to get this done in a week or 2 weeks. You don't have time to do design thinking. And so you get much better solutions, but you also have to put more work to get that quality. So I think that's why. I think, Tom, a lot of people, they just want to get it done. They want to get done quickly. And so they don't have that luxury of feeling out experientially. Another thing about design thinking is it's typically multimodal. There are different ways of thinking about the problem, approaching the problem. You're working at different levels of abstraction, and that also takes time. And it also takes the kind of person who's skilled at working in these different ways, or a team, even more challenging, a team of different people with these different modalities all communicating well together. So that's why there's so much, I don't know if I use the word trash, but a lot of low quality things out there that don't really deliver, because you can't, even the most experienced designers in the world do this. There's this idea that if you're good enough at design, you just know the answers, and it's just simply not the case. Being good at design is not knowing the answers and knowing that about yourself.
I think that's sort of an interesting introspective statement. Not knowing the answers and knowing that you don't know the answers. And I work with a lot of corporate and see a lot of corporate software where perhaps the material for the end users, people, the customers, may well have gone through and used things like design thinking. But the internal interfaces, the forms that, the analyst might have to fill out remind me of something from, the late 1980s kind of thing, little straight line kind of step. Do you think that organizations ought to be using things like design thinking even for internal software?
Of course, I wish they would. I think another example of that is the government. If you look at IRS forms, and a good friend of mine had this idea for a Department of Design in the government to help the government just improve the quality of these things. I think it's a brilliant idea. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to trade-offs. These businesses have a lot of constraints. And if someone's forced to fill out a form, the need for it to be high quality is very different than if you're trying to attract a customer who could go to another, use another alternative. And so I do think there's a different kind of pressure. And it would be easy for me to flippantly say, of course, everyone should be doing this process. But I think you really have to look if you're talking about, how much more time and resource goes into the form, how much time is saved in the organization to have the better form. And I think, if it's only used by 10 people, no need to spend 100 hours making it 10% better. But if it's being used by 1 million people, then of course you'd like to spend that time.
Right. And if those 1 million people actually pay the bills, yeah, there you go. I guess it is a function of where one wants to spend money in a lot of cases.
It's a luxury, actually. The whole design thinking, being able to do that process, it's a luxury. It's not a necessity.
Do you see, and I've recently been talking to a number of people in the AI industry on the podcast, and it's intriguing. Do you see perhaps either the proliferation of design thinking being supported, augmented by AI, or perhaps even replaced by AI?
It's funny. I think on the one hand, AI is great for allowing you to iterate more quickly and test more quickly. But it's also interesting to note that that's one of the things that the current configuration of AI is missing, is input from the outside world in iteration. And so AI actually does very well that version, maybe does in 2 minutes instead of 2 days, of make me a simple website or landing page or something like that. Actually, there are things before the current generation of AI that would do that as well with traditional computation, right?
Right.
But it's not capable right now I actually might argue it's capable, but people haven't set it up in the kind of way where the AI is actually testing it, listening to people, part of that conversation, working at these different levels of abstraction, and using that to iterate the solution. And so I think there is some future out there I can envision where the AI is actually gathering the feedback and iterating all the time on things. But right now we're living more of a reality where, you can crank out more iterations more quickly, a little bit, and maybe speeds the cycles of some design thinking. But the design thinking is still very much happening in the human brain.
I like the idea of faster iterations. I like the idea of using some form of generative AI in testing, and perhaps, having it capture information as you do the interview, and, use that as an embed to actually regen the AI code. All that I think would be really exciting, but having it make all the decisions, I don't know. It would, hopefully we would find something else fun to do in the interim. You're involved with visual design tools, and as someone who's actually done a bit of coding in his life and works with coders, I still don't see a lot of input or penetration of this, at least until relatively recently. Why has this been so long coming?
In terms of visual, what aspect of visual design tools exactly?
I mean, just the whole idea of visual design tools finding their way into whether it's web or any of the other major, sort of platforms.
Yeah, I think we've kind of been going through a bit of a slow revolution on the world of web and people's appreciation for the value of design. I think that really started with the iPhone, when people basically started to see a product that was differentiated by design and gathered so much market share that people started to think, I want to do the same thing for my product. And we started to see business leaders putting value on design. And I think that's a big change. I think a lot of time is it a luxury or a necessity to do this design thinking process and have such a great user experience that people don't leave and keep coming back. And we've just seen so many products over the last 5 or 10 years succeed simply because of that, because of the perfectly dialed in user experience that the executives have started to put a lot of value on it. And it's starting to spread from the digital world to other areas. Like, how well designed is your self-checkout experience, for example, right? And then those factors of design that might involve like architectural design as well as other things. And the system itself can make people want to come to your store more often, buy more things, fewer cashiers. And I think this is more your world than mine. I'm practicing this, and you're a lot more connected to that sort of enterprise world and what people are doing outside of tech. But I get the sense that people are seeing that value of design more and more. I think in terms of marketing, for a long time, people have recognized the power of good advertising and how design works there. And what's happening now is it's going from marketing to product and other parts of the experience where companies are dominating with great design by practicing design thinking. And that's leading to more tooling and more of it going on. So maybe it's turning from a luxury to a necessity based on competition.
So what would an example of a design, visual design thinking kind of tool be?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind are tools like Photoshop, Figma, pencil and paper. There are a lot of artboarding tools out, things like Miro and products like that are helping people practice design thinking. I'm working on a product that's built for web engineers to help them think a little more visually, to give them additional modalities for thinking while they work. And so I think in this sort of core design tech world, those are examples. You might even say, would you say that's something like a PowerPoint?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was that sort of percolated as I was asking the question, going, oh, I wonder if Steven's going to actually say PowerPoint. But I what the heck? I love a good paper prototype, right? Where you can, erase it and do it. So why wouldn't it be a design thinking tool where you could see something? Is it probably the fastest and, the highest quality? Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, well, it's ultimately very personal what you're like. Me personally, I do a lot of work in software. I also do work with pencil and paper. There's sometimes where I actually will write a lot, and just the process of writing, sometimes by hand, sometimes by typing. So for me, with my own creativity, I use a lot of different methods. And some of them are conversation, and some of them are taking walks. And so I think it's ultimately very personal. And when people ask me, is this tool going to be the one tool that rules everything? The real answer is no. To really work well, you need different tools for different phases of the process and at different levels of complexity and different, early prototypes, refining an existing product, very different worlds in terms of the kinds of tools and methods you might use.
Do you see them at some point, even if you are using a significant number of different tools, do you see them, at least at the software end, all being joined up so that the work can flow through?
Yeah. I see it more as, yes, they're all joined up so the work can flow through. But I think that it's almost more of a kind of many-to-many relationship between different tools and processes. And spending as much time as I have looking at the web space lately, we're building a product for sophisticated developers that are hand coding applications, bring design thinking to that. Mm-hmm. And there's another part of the market, which is people wanting to, do something like use Squarespace or Wix to put up a simple landing page. And our product could be used for that, but I think it's unlikely that our product is going to be the best solution for that. Because if you're completely non-technical, you want something very simple, you're going to want something that's more tailored to you. And so the world of the web is so huge, and that's just one niche of the global ecosystem of all the things that are being designed. Just even in the web, we see lots of different needs and lots of different use cases. And back to the PowerPoint example, There are times where PowerPoint makes sense. Keynote does great things in terms of giving you like certain templates that are a certain level of design quality. But when I make a slide deck, I'm going to use something more like Figma because I have a lot of experience. I want full control of everything, right? I can make my own templates. I want to dial in and adjust every pixel. I want to do more advanced. I might be using a Photoshop or something to make images. And so even in just the tiny world of making presentation decks, you see different tools for different people. And I don't think that's going to change. I couldn't imagine one tool that would both satisfy someone who's making their first presentation ever with very little digital experience and someone like me who's, been designing for, most of my life and is super fast and fluid with the most advanced and detail oriented tools out there.
So you have, you're a serial business founder, serial entrepreneur. You have academic credentials that, just wonderful kinds of things. Technologist, business. How much time do you actually spend in front of a keyboard anymore?
Oh, a lot of time. Yeah. I spend a lot of time in front of a keyboard these days.
Doing technical things or writing those reports to your accountant or reviewing your accountant. Different things could happen in front of a keyboard.
Yeah, I've gone through phases in my career. Back when I had my agency business, I did no programming for a while, right? I just didn't touch a line of code for years. With my latest venture, MightyMeld, I wrote the initial prototype myself. So I was doing very hardcore development work, applying all of my computer science knowledge, cracking a problem, and continued to spend most of my time programming for the first year after we received funding. I think the majority of my time was spent on development because that's basically we needed to get that critical mass going. So I spent a lot of time actually doing the work and building and creating and designing. Actually, more recently, I've been spending a lot more of my time on the design front, working on the visual aspects and then using our product a lot as well in terms of building things with it. And so I spent a lot of time at the keyboard and, and now a lot of my time is spent on the keyboard communicating with our customers and just chatting and talking to people and getting to know them. And so that's a different kind of desk work I'm doing.
That's fair. And, I talk to a lot of people that make the transition between technician and founder. And as it scales up, I think they all wrestle with when is it that I stop being the chief technician, the CTO or something like that. Maybe they just end up hiring a CI or CEO and stay the CTO so that they can stay technical. As MightyMeld scales, is that something that you're going to have to wrestle with?
I'm not too precious about what I do. I just looking to do whatever. All my creative projects that I've done, they're like babies, right? You just do what your baby needs, and that changes. I happen to have dinner with the founder of a very successful, multi-billion-dollar tech company who was talking about programming something in the past week, and he was still developing. And of course, he doesn't have enough time and focus to be on some of the core challenges of the company. That's what's basically happening with me. In order to solve the technical problems, I need to be thinking about it while I sleep. I need to be putting like big blocks of time. My schedule doesn't allow for that anymore. And I think he's in a similar boat, but he still was experimenting with things he found interesting, working technically. And I think if someone at that scale of business is still working technically, I probably will be. But yeah, I don't wrestle with it as much as I go with the flow. And I think one of the reasons I operate as an entrepreneur is that I feed off of all these different kinds of energy, and I like to have that mix, and being an entrepreneur allows me to.
So is that really what drives you to continue to build and do new things?
I don't know where the drive comes from, honestly. I just know it doesn't stop. Yeah.
One of the comments I saw on the website as I was going through and thinking about our conversation on MightyMeld's website was comment, not a code generator, but a code injector. And I wrote that down just because it's like that stopped me in my tracks, and I looked at that for a while. What's the difference?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a fine line, right? The word code generator has a meaning in the community, and it's associated with a certain kind of process where you have a visual design, you're working in like a different representation than your code, some other object model, shall we say. And then once that's done, you hit a button, the code comes out. And so a big block of code comes out. And then that creates issues for engineers because how does that integrate with the rest of their code? And what if their code evolves? How does this thing evolve with it? And what MightyMeld does is it does surgical micro updates to your code. So you actually load up your code in our visualization environment. You make visual changes, and it does these very small updates. And so it is technically generating code, but it generates very, very small amounts of code and kind of surgically places them. And so that comment was meant to kind of differentiate and help people understand that we're not making these big blocks of code. We're doing something that's designed to elegantly kind of interweave itself into your engineering process.
So I'll, having dealt with code generators before, and your description, I think, is apt, and it's been one of the bugaboos with code generators going all the way back into the 1980s when we were doing case and upper and lower case and all that good stuff. When you're doing these micro injections, you're done, you have your source code, and do you maintain it in the tool? I maybe this is way too deep for this conversation.
Sure.
Maybe not, but where do you maintain it? Is it the tool's going to maintain it, or human beings going to maintain it? How does that work?
Yeah, so ultimately the human being, is the one who maintains the code. The code lives in a development environment, often a laptop, sometimes a container in the cloud. It's being managed with GitHub, where you're making pull requests with every update that are reviewed by the team. And so, our tool is making these updates, but you're still very much maintaining them. And one of the things we pride ourselves in is that as you do this visual work, the code updates are what you would have written anyway. And it's really,
that's significantly more palatable for somebody who's actually had to maintain somebody else's code. Just saying.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if you can hear my pent up passion and excitement for what we're doing. I don't want to get too salesy in this call about it. It's not what this conversation is about. But yeah, as an engineer, I feel the same way about code generators. I think we actually said, don't code generators suck or something like that on our website because.
Yes, I think you did.
I have that same revulsion, right? And a lot of the motivation for the project was to try to give engineers something that worked and that I wanted as an engineer that would work for my process. And this more micro approach where things flow and you're still fully in control. That's what I want as an engineer. I had an interesting conversation talking about control and that kind of clarity, and how engineering robustness is directly related to having that more simple and minimal solution to the problem. And I think that's kind of the problem with code generators is suddenly you have a solution that is no longer minimal. And for engineering problem solving, if you don't have the exact right building blocks, things can get multiplicatively more complex very, very quickly if your building blocks are not tidy.
One more question before we start to wrap. When you built MightyMeld, did you use design thinking to build MightyMeld?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where I think you have to use design thinking to do something innovative. This example of a landing page in 2 days. Sure, you can do that. When Tim Berners-Lee was making the first landing page, it didn't take him 2 days. I think the further you get away from the known, the more you venture out into the unknown, the more you need to have this experiential. It needs to be experiential because you can't linearly extrapolate along an exponential. You need to experience it and see how it develops. And so you need to think experientially, and you also need to work in a multimodal way, because you need to come at it from lots of different angles. We had, I don't know how many times in the first year of the project, the team got stuck. We had this thing where we were like, this project is dead. We weren't sure if it was possible when we started. We actually figured it could likely be impossible. And we had these moments where we're like, we're dead. This project simply won't work. And then always a couple of days later, someone would figure out some solution to it. And it was because of that design thinking. It was because of stepping back, trying different things, coming at it from different angles, trying to see it in different ways, that we managed to build what we did.
Steven, if you woke up tomorrow morning, someone handed you your morning, caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand and said you had 2 wishes, and any 2 wishes that you could improve the world of visual design, what would those 2 things be and why?
Yeah, I think the first thing I really would like to do is make the web more visual and more intuitive. And I think we have a ways to go in terms of making the web high quality. And we continue to raise the game, but I'm just very passionate about trying to give people tools to go to those next levels of usability, quality, intuitiveness in terms of how the web functions. And I guess we could go into some details on how I see that happening. That might be a little too much of a tangent for this point in the conversation. And I think the other thing that I would wish for is just that more people have the experience of doing design and working visually themselves and thinking visually and learning to see things. I think that would help our visual culture tremendously. Just the practice of, and it's kind of like this with writing. If you write and sit down and I'm going to edit, and you iterate and you do 30 drafts of your 800 word blog post, you get so much better at writing. You get so much better at reading and communicating verbally. It's very the same with visuals. I wish more people took time to really try to create visually. A lot of people have these phobias. I can't draw. That's not my thing. I wish people were more comfortable just learning. I was like that for a long time, not being able to draw. And it was just iteration that got me skilled at it. So yeah, that's my second wish, is just more people would participate and feel comfortable practicing visual design and communicating. You don't need to be highly skilled to communicate. We all know these comics that are very basic, but communicate so well. So
any idea on how to jumpstart people into that world of design, or at least trying and doing some iterations to get moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of momentum for that in the world today. I think actually the burst of AI has actually led to people generating images more easily. And so I think a lot of people are participating in that world right now. And I think the prompt-based systems have made it easier. And Instagram has done a tremendous thing to photography in terms of having people practice photography and experience photography and see how people react to their photographs and iterate. And you see people with, the 3,000 posts on their Instagram reels. Those are 3,000 photos they've taken and curated. And so it seems like we have a lot of that actually. I think the wave is already, building up. I just want to see more of it. And I think there's still some domains where you don't see as much accessibility. And, things like 3D is a big space where I think it's still there's been a lot of attempts at it, but I think there's a wave coming in terms of accessibility for 3D creation. So
that'll be fun. If people wanted to continue the conversation with you, how would they go about doing it? If they wanted to find out more about MightyMeld, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, if you want to find out more about MightyMeld, go to mightymeld.com. You can learn about it. Join our Discord group if you want to be part of the conversation. We've got a lot of great videos on YouTube. And yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, I think LinkedIn is always a good way to communicate. I'm fortunate enough to have a rare last name. So if you search for me, you'll find me, and just drop me a connection request if you want to chat.
And obviously we'll have the point at your profile in the show notes. Steven, this was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it. As you know, I open up the platform at this point for you to promote anything that you like. So the platform's yours. Thank you for providing such wonderful information.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I've already mentioned MightyMeld, and people know how to get to that. But I think for one other thing that I'm really passionate about is typography. And so just to give a shout out to my favorite type foundry, their name is Dynamo, spelled Dinamo. They're based out of Switzerland, and they have amazing typefaces. Their font is being used for MightyMeld. It was used as part of my last project, and I couldn't be happier working with their type. And speaking of things that I wish more people would engage more deeply with, type also is something I really just encourage people to dive in. It's an amazing world, and a beautiful and such a subtle and marvelous thing to understand, what makes a typeface great and to experience the greatness of a typeface. So I'll do that as a shout out to Dynamo.
Steven Schkolne, this was absolutely marvelous. Thank you for spending time with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to get to connect with your audience here, Tom, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 7 of Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World by Kyle Newport is titled Rule 4, Drain the Shallows. During both my reads of this chapter, I have been struck by the amount of shallow work that creeps into my day even after the experiments and tweaks tried over the past several weeks. This week, we focus on reducing the amount of shallow work. Remember to buy a copy of Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. Link in the show notes, and read along. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 809, we'll feature our essay discussing whether accountability and responsibility are really ever separated in real life. Segregating the two ilities makes sense for some roles, but the nuances are generally far messier. We'll also have a visit from John M. Quigley, who brings his alpha and omega of product development to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?